And what I want to introduce to you now is this two-part journey. A human being wants to grow and develop in an adaptive skill. What they're going to want to do is they're going to want to focus their work and their energy in two different places. They're going to want to focus in part on what's going on inside of them. And so on your page there, you'll see this mind and heart half of the equation. It's the internal part. This has to do with my attitudes. This has to do with my beliefs. This has to do with my mindset. We work on changing what's going on inside. That's part of the equation. The other half of the equation is external. It's behaviors that we put on, that we consciously put on. The problem is this. Most people, I believe, when they're motivated to improve an adaptive skill, they tend to do one or the other at the exclusion of the other one, and it doesn't work. So they, for example, they go internal. Oh, I have to feel non-defensive. Oh, it didn't work. I still feel defensive. And now they beat themselves up because they tried so hard not to feel defensive, and it didn't work, and they still feel defensive. Then they get down on themselves, and you're going to hear me talk about this a little bit. That part of the problem where you start to beat yourself up, in and of itself makes it hard to grow that adaptive skill, right? When you spend a lot of time doing self-condemnation, as opposed to practicing an adaptive skill that we'll talk about called self-compassion, you actually make it harder for you to get into, to learn the new adaptive skill. Here's another example. Oh, I have to like and respect her. Oh, I still hate her guts. It didn't work. And then I beat myself up because I wasn't able to talk myself into feeling a certain way, right? So there's an example of somebody who's going to only go with the internal at the exclusion of the external. Now the opposite would be the person who doesn't care at all about what's happening inside, doesn't try to do any work on attitudes and beliefs and mindset. They just do everything they can to put on the behavior. I'm going to act this way every time I'm around her. Now what could be the problem with that at the exclusion of the inner work? It might totally not look sincere.
Not addressing the real issues.
Not addressing the issues. Not sustainable. Those, you guys are bing, bing, bing. Those are the three right there. And it's not sustainable, right? When you only focus on the external, you wear yourself out, you beat yourself up, but you also, no, I'm sorry, don't beat yourself. You wear yourself out, you show up phony, right? You don't deal with what needs to be dealt with. And you can't put that on forever. You can't hold that. That doesn't last. It's too exhausting, right? And so the answer is, we're going to do both. For each adaptive skill, we're going to work on both halves of it. And I want you to remember this concept, because not only the three adaptive skills we're going to work on, two of the adaptive skills we're going to work on today, one of them we're going to do on day 3, you're going to see us working on both those halves for each of those adaptive skills. But even any other adaptive skill, besides the 3 we're going to focus on here, you decide to make a change in an adaptive skill, there's going to be internal and external work. And your job is to discover what that is, okay? So we're going to spend a little bit of time here before we get into some specifics. I want to talk to you about this half, the mind and heart half here. Let's talk about this. And this is going to be a pretty general, kind of a harder question that I'm going to throw out at you. What might be, and this is kind of a generic way to look at this, but what might be things that a human being might want to do if they wanted to change their mindset, their feelings, their belief system, their attitude? This is the internal work. Give me some strategies. What might a human being do if they wanted to make those kinds of changes?
I went to a seminar once that was specifically around dealing with people you find difficult. But it was, every time you have like an interaction you find frustrating, name 3 positive things in your mind about the person.
Okay.
Eventually it starts to make you think of them, not just the things that frustrate you about them, but you were cueing in all these positive things. Great.
So you're struggling with somebody, you practice this positive mindset, looking for things you appreciate or you like. Now, what's your name?
Jennifer.
What Jennifer just talked about is, has a lot of words to it, self-talk, right, inner dialogue. You've all done this, right, in various ways. You practice a new mindset. You practice a positive outlook on something that tends to make you sad, right? You practice a positive outlook toward a person. For example, you might practice assigning good motives to somebody, right? Have you ever done that before? Just practice assigning good motives, as opposed to what we tend to do as humans. And we're going to get into brain research here in a minute. But I'll tell you what, our brains have evolved to look for the negative in everything. Did you know that? In fact, there's some really interesting research on this. We are experts at finding problems. We're experts at finding what's wrong. That's how we survived, right? Through eons of time, we became really good at noticing danger. It's said that our brains are Velcro for the bad and Teflon for the good. That our brains are constantly scanning the environment, including other people, and looking for negative. It's just the way we're built. And so fighting that and working against that is an uphill battle, but it's worth it. And we do that in part through practicing different ways of thinking, right? Assigning a good motive as opposed to immediately going to the suspicious motive. Right? Thinking of positives as opposed to just thinking about the negatives. What else? What might a human being do that wanted to grow in sort of the mindset, the attitudes, the beliefs?
Ask yourself why.
Good. Ask yourself why what?
Why over change or why?
What's the motive?
Yeah.
What's the benefit for me? Good. Find some energy around motivation for why it will be a better life if I have a different way of looking at things. What else?
What if you tell people when you're open about the fact that you're working on this change so that you can hold yourself accountable and help you?
Yeah, have people in your life who know that you're attempting to grow in certain areas. That's its own built-in accountability, isn't it? To know that there's partners out there in the world who, you can kind of plant this idea that you're wanting to change and grow. Just saying it to somebody actually helps cement it in ourselves. It also adds a bit of accountability. There's certainly, you've all, I'm sure, done good reading or audiobooks, right, around personal growth. That's all part of this. Some of you have done therapy or counseling, which I'm a big believer in for your average person, right? Having someone help me work through stuff. What else?
Another really specific one, but it was around triggering. When I worked with somebody before, that was if something triggers you, whichever way, reflecting on your own self-values, like kind of find your key values, that might be why it's triggering.
Good.
If you hadn't gone into the value part, you wouldn't really know why you're triggering, you're just reacting.
Yeah.
Trying to react to the trigger.
Why am I reacting this way to this person? Well, what is it that they're doing? What is it triggering in me? There's some self-exploration there, right? Digging deep to find out kind of what makes you tick. I mean, this is all personal work. Here's a couple others I'll share with you. And I've been accused a couple times of being kind of an evangelist in this way, so I'm not going to push on this real hard with you guys, but anyone here ever practice mindfulness, meditation? Okay, a few of you guys. I mean, this sounds a little extreme, but it's probably changed my life. About 7 or 8 years ago, I started practicing, and what it has done for me, and the more I've studied it, it's gotten me to a place where, number one, I can so much more clearly than before. I can see what's going on. Like I can find my motives that were hidden from me before. I can find why I'm feeling this certain way in this certain situation. I can discover it. What it does for you, here's an analogy. How many have seen The Matrix? You guys know the scene where Neo's being shot at and he's getting out of the way of the slow motion bullets? Well, they're not really going in slow motion, right? But he's seeing them in slow motion, which gives him time to get out of the way. What mindfulness has done for me, it's allowed me to see what's happening right in the conversation and go, oh, I'm triggered right now by this, and there's that defensiveness. Wow, I'm seeing it in real time. So in the moment that I have time to do something different. So that's a long way of saying mindfulness helps us with reactivity, helps us to be much more present in the moment and see what's really going on. It's led me to be able to, well, here's another adaptive skill. I was at a fundraiser many months ago. I'm on the board of an organization, a nonprofit, And we do a couple fundraisers every year. And because I'm on the board, I have to kind of be the guy. And I'm, there's this hour before the program starts, and people are drinking wine, and we're walking around and mingling. And I really don't like that part of fundraisers. I don't mind the wine part, but I don't really like the walking around and shaking hands with people. I feel self-conscious. I just don't like it at all. And so I was at this fundraiser, and I was doing what I think I tend to do, and I wasn't enjoying this hour. And here's what I caught myself doing, and I think it's because of my mindfulness practice I was able to notice this, but I found myself being really judgy to every single person I met. Right? And remember our brains tend to do that anyways? That really is built into us. But I caught myself thinking things like, boy, what's with her? And man, boy, he sure thinks well of himself, doesn't he? Or, I caught myself having a snarky comment or a snarky attitude toward everyone I met. No wonder I wasn't having fun. So I decided to kind of be Neo and get out of the way of the bullets. I said, all right, I have time to adjust this. So I put on this adaptive skill that's called curiosity. Now here's a note to you guys. It's almost impossible to be judgy when you're being curious. They kind of trump each other. You can't do both. And so I went into curiosity. I just did my best to change my mindset. And so there's probably another 40 minutes left of this mingling time. I tell you what, guys, it was fun. I had a really fun time. I found myself able, with each person I met, to go into this mode internally of wondering about the person, right? Being curious about who they are and what their life is, and it was really hard to be judgy at the same time. So there's an example of where I think the mindfulness itself gave me the opportunity to access another adaptive skill in the moment. Right, I'm going to talk about one more. We're going to talk about adaptive skill that is very much in the mind and heart category, although it does have some behaviors attached to it. They all do, by the way. Curiosity is a very internal thing, but there's some external behaviors attached to it, right? They all have both, right? How many of you would agree, and this is so rhetorical, I wish I hadn't started that sentence that way. Empathy is a big deal, right, for managers? It's real important. It's really important that we're able to practice empathy. There's actually whole trainings out there on empathy. And here's what we believe. Empathy is on a dimmer switch. You actually have a dimmer switch. Not literally, but you have a dimmer switch, right? Which means you can toggle your level of felt empathy. And I hope you see how important that is. Can you imagine going through life with your empathy switch on full blast? All the time? If I walked downtown and had my empathy switch on all full blast, I would be in a fetal position, right? I mean, I would just feel everybody's pain. And I mean, we can't go through life with that switch on all the time, full blast. We would just be dysfunctional, right? But can we also agree it's not okay to have it off, right? I mean, can you say sociopath, right? I mean, that's not a good place to live. The cool news here is that we actually are able to toggle that. And it's a whole thing, and if there's work people can do on this, but there's a method to growing your control over that empathy switch. And I'm going to give you a fast little insight into it. So this is just kind of a freebie, no extra charge. I want you to imagine for me for a minute. Just do this exercise with me. Just take a minute. I want you to imagine that you're in a movie. And in fact, I want you to imagine that your life is a movie. Okay, it's a long, long, long movie. Okay, that's what you're doing right now. You're in this movie. Now, dumb question, but who's the star of your movie? Ta-da! Right, you are the star of your movie. Now, you're probably the hero also, but that's a whole separate story. But you are the star of your story. Now, here's the thing, and before you get cynical, hear me out. You are the only star of your story. You don't have co-stars. Trust me, you do not have co-stars. Let's take an example of real life here. I'm going to age myself. Harry met Sally. Okay, who are the co-stars? Meg Ryan?
Billy Crystal.
Billy Crystal. Good. You got mail? It was in the 80s. It was Meg Ryan and somebody always. Tom Hanks. All right. Now, how do we know that they were co-stars? What tells us that these were actual co-stars?
The billing.
Okay. The poster, right? Both faces, both names. What else? Airtime, prominent screen time. Okay. It was clearly co-stars, right? Those are co-stars. You don't have a co-star. Now, I know this is going to sound mean. I don't have a co-star. Now, I actually have a really important supporting actress in my life. And I have several other supporting actors and actresses, my 4 kids. They're not a star of my movie. Like, think about my day today, right? Like, where's my focus today? How much percentage of my focus today do you think is on me versus on my wife? See what I'm saying? My focus is not on my wife today. It's not that I don't think of her today, and I do. I've already talked to her once, right? I'm not saying she doesn't have a part. She's a supporting actress. She's not a star of my movie. And I know this sounds terrible. You're all thinking, that guy's an asshole, right? So please don't think that, because you're the same, right? You are the star of your universe. You are, when you're, here's a weird way of looking at this, but when you got up this morning and went through all your morning routines, your main focus was you. It wasn't someone else in your life. And I'm not saying they didn't have a part, right? That's what a supporting actor and actress is. They have a part. Now let me make it worse. You already think I'm a jerk. Let me add to that. I also have a lot of extras and walk-ons in my life. And no offense, you guys, and please don't take this bad, but you guys are extras and walk-ons in my life. Like the thing is, next weekend, I'm probably not going to be thinking about you a whole lot, and you're not going to get a Christmas card, and I hope that, that'd be creepy, right, if you did. I have extras, I have walk-ons. These are people that impact me for some time, but not permanently, right? You guys have extras. I'm an extra in your movie. Right? I'm taking a bigger piece of your energy today, but not at all probably tomorrow. So we have extras. Now, why does this relate to empathy? Here's how this all circles back. The practice of empathy is this exercise that you walk people through where they think about them as the center of their movie, but then they stop and think about everyone around them. Pick anyone in this room right now. Don't look at them, just think about someone else in this room. They're having the same rich life experience you're having, right? They're the center of their movie. You're an extra to them. They see the world through this lens of them. They're the star of their movie. They're the #1 highest billing star. They have a few supporting actors and actresses in their life. They've got tons of extras. And where empathy begins is where we say to ourselves, for this moment, I'm going to put myself in their movie. Right? For this moment, I'm going to remember that they're having this exact same rich life experience I'm having, but I'm going to put myself in their movie right now. Now imagine what that would be like if you're, for example, correcting an employee. But before you did that, you did this exercise, okay? That person is the star of their movie. And this thing that's happening right now is happening to them, right? And I'm going to now calibrate their experience, right? I want to see this experience from that vantage point. That's empathy. Now here's the really cool thing about working on mind and heart stuff, and this also applies to working on the behavior piece. When you practice new adaptive skills, something happens physically to you, okay? Now on the non-physical part, you just grow muscle memory, you grow habits, right? That's kind of how we grow our adaptive skills. We practice new things, we change our habits. But physically, did you guys know that our brain changes? Have you guys heard of the elasticity of the brain? You know it's true, you probably heard this true in some cases, right? You learn a new foreign language, you learn a new musical instrument, you're literally growing gray matter in the right places to support that change. That's literally physically happening. Folks, that's the same thing that happens when you practice new adaptive skills. Over time, you grow new neural pathways. And that thing that was really hard to do before becomes easier over time. Not just because of the habits you're forming, but because of the way your brain is actually changing. Isn't that cool? You can actually, through practice, change your brain around these adaptive skills. So if you take these concepts where you take the internal stuff, and we'll get to the external here in a minute, and you put those together and you practice it over and over again, and the one I just shared with you, you practice putting yourself in the other person's movie, and you do that a few times a day, you can actually start to see that become part of your actual default mode. And that's how people grow empathy. One of the ways they do that. Now there's external behaviors attached to empathy too, right? What are external behaviors attached to empathy?
Listening.
Like listening, right? Listening in a way that makes the other person feel heard. There's an external practice that would connect with empathy. Okay? All right, now let's go to the external. Here's what we do with the external stuff. break the skill down into its component parts, right? You actually, this is an important piece, and we're going to do this in a minute for a couple different skills. You take the skill and you break it down into its parts. You can't just say, be a better listener, right? What does that mean? No, it's very behavioral. In fact, there's 8 different things we're going to learn to do today that will physically make you a better listener. Things you're going to be doing physically. So you break the skill down into its physical parts. And that should say physical. We're going to actually change the PowerPoint and the book. There's a hint to Melissa there. We're going to break the skill down into its physical parts. Then you're going to practice those things over and over and over again. And the whole time you're practicing, you're going to offer yourself a whole lot of compassion. You're not going to beat yourself up when you fail, because you will fail dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And the actual act of beating yourself up makes it hard for you to learn the skill. I'm going to probably say it a couple more times to you over the next 5 days. When you don't do the skill well and then you spend time on self-condemnation, that in itself poisons the process. Okay? Now this is going to make more sense because we're going to do this together. So again, we take the skill, we break it down into its physical parts, we practice those things over and over again. We give ourselves self-compassion the whole time, and at the same time, we're working on the internal piece of that. Let me give you one more model, and then we're going to practice our first adaptive skill. You're working on changing your adaptive skills. You're going to go through these phases. The first phase you're going to go through is the phase that is described in Johari's window. This is called unconscious incompetence. This is where you have no idea that you have a deficit in an adaptive skill, okay? So here's my example. One of the skills that I did not bring with me into adulthood was listening so the other person felt heard. I was a terrible listener. And this is the phase where I have no idea. I have no idea I'm a bad listener. And any feedback I was getting, I wasn't really getting. You know, if she would just talk more clearly, everything would be fine. Right? It wasn't me, it was someone else, and I'm fine. And I was a really assertive listener. Like I can multitask while you're talking to me, and I can interrupt you because I already know what you're going to say, and what I have to say is more important anyways. And very, very crappy listener. But this is the phase where I have no idea. Now, how many of you are in that phase, at least in some area? That's a trick question. Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Of course you're all in that area and you don't know where it is, right? I actually had a lady argue with me on this a couple months ago. She goes, well, no, I don't think I actually have this going on anymore. Wow, you have every adaptive skill known to man, right? There's no gaps whatsoever, right? Of course you have gaps here. And of course you don't know where they are. All right. Then we get into, in many times in our life, we get into conscious incompetence. This is where, sometimes this is called the painful phase. Oh, wow, I'm a bad listener. How embarrassing is that? How many toes have I stepped on throughout my life? That's really embarrassing. Now, I'm going to go a little deeper on psychology here. Your level of self-compassion is actually what makes it possible or not for you to get into this phase. So here's what I mean by that. Let's say you're the kind of person that beats yourself up a lot. You struggle so much with who you are, and whenever you make a mistake or don't do something as well as you would like to, you spend a fair amount of time beating yourself up. Here's what might happen to you. You're at this phase, but you're almost at this phase, right? You're just on the cusp. You're just almost there. You're on the cusp. But there's this internal voice, and it's very unconscious. You don't know you're doing this, but this internal voice is saying this to you. Oh my gosh, I have to get my head around this idea that I'm a bad listener, and that's really painful. I'm already a really bad person. In fact, my Mike Nash negative bucket is already full. And I have no room to put anything else in this, because if I add something else to this terrible bucket of mine, it's going to overflow, and I'm really going to struggle with my self-esteem. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to go from here right back to here. And we call that denial. And you've all done it, and when you did it, you didn't know you were doing it, right? And the reason we do that is because we're fragile, right? We already feel so bad about ourselves. You can't add another growth opportunity, because that would be admitting that you have a deficit. And you already have 1,000 of them. You have no room for any more. On the other hand, if you are practicing self-compassion and giving yourself grace, which again is a whole adaptive skill, when you're at this point, Your inner dialogue might sound more like this. Oh man, I have to get my head around the idea that I'm a bad listener, and that's embarrassing. How many toes have I stepped on? I'm a pretty good guy. I never said I was perfect. My Mike Nash bucket, negative bucket, is only a quarter full. I got room to throw this in there. Let's throw it in there and let's call it a growth opportunity. Let's work on this. Right? See the difference? So this is where self-esteem, where self-compassion, or the lack thereof, gets in our way and makes it really hard for us to move into the next phase. That's why I keep saying that this self-compassion piece is one of your most important adaptive skills.